After a long ride, you encounter a place known as Pariah Abbey. You decide to go inside, making your way to the chapel in search of the statue of Azura. You walk through the small chapel towards the towering bronze statue depicting the beautiful Daedric Prince. As you stare up at her in awe, she says to you,
"I am Azura, Queen of Dawn and Dusk."
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we are going to be discussing Azura. More specifically, why would anyone choose to worship Azura, and why you may want to on your next playthrough. To do this, we are going to have to go over a few things. Firstly, who even is Azura? So what is she known as, along with what she is associated with? Then we will move on to discuss the history of Azura. So what historical events she has been involved in. After this, we will discuss what Azura is god over, the mythology surrounding Azura, along with who worships her and why do they worship her. Finally, we will discuss the various creations of Azura, this being her realm in Oblivion, her servants, along with her various artifacts. So let us begin with who Azura actually is. So Azura is one of the Daedric Princes who is viewed as more of a good Daedra by the Dunmer people, with some Dunmer people viewing her as the mother soul. This coming from the view that she is a sort of origin for the Dunmer, rather than an individual ancestor. But not all describe her as such a good Daedra, with some descriptions of her actually linking her to some of the more negatively viewed Daedric princes, like that of Molag Bal, this being through the faction known as Oblivion. In this, Molag Bal is said to have a positive association with Azura. Some in the Iliac Bay region have also described Azura as someone who bewitches her followers into becoming her lovers and essentially her slaves. But anyway, Azura is said to be the Daedric Prince of many things, being described as the Daedric Prince of vanity and egotism in some cases, whereas others will describe her as having an association with mystery and magic, fate and prophecy. But with her being known as the Daedric Prince of Dawn and Dusk, she is also known to have an association with the magic in between the realms of Twilight. So what does this mean? Azura is a rather unique Daedric Prince, as she is the only Daedric Prince that is perceived as having a feminine image, and is described as a woman. We see this in her being described as the female anticipation of Sotha Sil. With this, between the years 405 and 417 in the Third Era, we see if the agent rejects Azura's quest, Azura will yell at the agent, "No, you're supposed to say yes. You're supposed to say, yes, beautiful Azura. I would gladly murder at the snap of your ivory fingers. Boar, bigot, barbarian. Now I must go before I forget that I am a lady and say something that I'll regret." At this time, she is described as being the Daedric Prince of vanity and egotism. This may be why all of her statues depict her as being a beautiful woman. This is also fitting as her realm is said to hold too much beauty that it could render a mortal viewer half blind. When it comes to the links to magic, prophecy and fate that Azura has, this can easily be seen in the story of the Dunmer and the Naravarine. In this story, it is said that Azura would curse the Tribunal Temple along with the rest of the Kaima, this being due to the Tribunal Temple gods going back on a promise to never use the Kalgranak tools, which is actually how the Tribunal gods achieved godhood. This is how the Kaima became the Dunmer, and the Naravarine prophecy was created, ultimately predicting an end to the false gods through this prophecy. We see with this various descriptions of Azura throughout Tamriel that Azura desired the love of her followers, which indicates the reason for the harsh reaction for the betrayal, with the description by Vestari highlighting this desire for love. Love. With Azura, everything begins with love, a love that is fierce, possessive, even cruel, but always true and impossibly deep. But when it comes to the worship of Azura, love must be also felt for oneself. As if you feel hatred for yourself, Azura feels the pain you feel. Azura seems to care about her followers, unlike many of the other Daedric princes, which makes her rather interesting. Those who follow her do acknowledge her being a cruel but wise deity. If we look at the depictions of Azura in her varying statues, she is often carved as a beautiful woman, with a crescent moon and a star being depicted with her. We also see on the flag of Azura the star of Azura. This is a representation of Azura. There is also another visible representation of Azura, however, this being in the sky. This representation is known as the Twilight Star. Twilight Star is only visible during dawn and dusk, low in the sky. below the constellation known as the Steed. The times it is visible, dawn and dusk, fit with some of the various names and descriptions of the Daedric Prince, as she is known as the Twilight Queen, or the Queen of Dawn and Dusk. Based on who Azura is, why would anyone choose to worship her? Well, considering that Azura is viewed by the Dunmer as a sort of origin for their race, there would be a sort of mother-like connection to her, creating a bond with her that the Dunmer would not have to other Daedric princes like Molag Bal. Considering that Azura is described as a somewhat more caring Daedra, as she is considered to feel the pain of self-hatred in her worshippers, it would make it feel as if, as a worshipper, she cares about your well-being. So based on who Azura is, it seems as if those who worship her feel a connection to her. They feel cared about by her. But this is only one part of the story, not the full picture. To learn more, we should move on to the history of Azura. The history of Azura begins in the First Era, this being with the Corellania clan. The Corellania clan were a group of Ultima who were Daedra worshippers. More specifically, they worshipped what was called the Three Queens, these being Azura, Meridia, and Nocturnal. But it was not always just these three. Specifically, we will get into why they worship these three through a brief explanation of the Corellanian history. So the Corellanian clan, when the followers of Veloth chose to leave for Morrowind, would stay behind in Somerset. Now, throughout the First Era, the Alessian Empire would increase in influence, and they were known to not be approving of Daedra worship. With this, there would be threats of severe punishment for those holding Velothi beliefs. This included the imprisonment of their leaders and the seizure of their property. So the Corellania clan would choose to self-exile rather than deal with this persecution. Around the year 522 in the First Era, this being under the guidance of Sundavar Corellania, the Corellania clan would pack up and set sail for Hammerfell, making their homes in the ancient Ayleid city of Salas An, this being declared the new capital of the Corellanian clan. Here, the Corellania clan would manage to flourish, having a friendly relationship with the clan Dirani and having an active trading relationship with the Bosma, this being in the coastal trade due to further inward expansion being hindered by the Alessians and the native tribes residing within Hammerfell, these being creatures like the giant goblins. This would push the Corellania clan to becoming sea merchants, which would lead to them discovering Solstice. Solstice, however, being inhabited by the native Argonians, preventing the Corellanians from conquering it. However, here they would discover the secrets of necromancy. In the year 808 in the First Era, the Regatta would land on the shores of Hammerfell. This would lead to the slaughter of the Corellanians, as the Regatta sought out any member of the Corellanian clan that they could find due to their use of necromancy on the Regatta. This would lead to the Corellania clan returning to Somerset, being pushed out by a military campaign that started in the year 853 by the Regatta in Hammerfell. However, with some members having strong ties to necromancy and Daedric worship, it would lead to poor standing with the other clans in Somerset. They would eventually be forced into exile and would head to Solstice in the year 909 in the First Era. The Corellanians would move into the western part of Solstice, where the advanced Argonians had largely abandoned, moving to the eastern side of the island instead. So at this time, there was no hostility between the Corellanian elves and the native Argonians. But they weren't exactly besties either. This changing in the year 1017 when Kinlady Elenqua would pass and hand the Kinlord title to her son Orelmar. Kinlord Orelmar believed that the Corellanians needed more land. Initially, this expansion would only take unoccupied land. However, it would soon begin to move into the land of the native Argonians. Now, the Argonians would not just give up the land, they would fight back. However, the Tideborn Argonians were easily defeated by the Corellanian forces. But the Stone Nest Argonians would be a lot harder to beat. This would lead to 2 centuries of fighting, this being until Kinlady Turinwe would call for peace. And in the year 1244, the Peace of Zorhist would be established between the Corellania clan and the Stone Nest tribes. It recognized both of the groups' control over their currently occupied parts of the island, preventing the other group from constructing settlements within the other's territory, and also allowed the freedom of movement to travel throughout the island. The Tideborn Argonians were said to have had a hand in the negotiations. Now jumping forward to the year 2631 in the First Era. This is when tensions within the Corellania clan would begin to rise. At this time, the clan was led by Kinlord Wraithamil, but this would not be for long, as his younger brother, Istamil Corellania, would do the unthinkable. Istamil would murder his older brother and take control over the clan. However, this would not sit well with many within the clan, leading to a civil war breaking out. This civil war pitting the members of the Corellania family against each other. By the year 2633, Istamil had lost many of his allies, only having the College of Rituals backing him and his murderous claim to the throne. However, this would not stop Istamil. Istamil, in hopes of holding onto power, would turn to creating a dark pact with the Daedric Prince Molak Bal, worshipping him in return for the power he could provide. Molak Bal would provide Istamil with an army of Daedra. Along with this, he would use necromancy to fill his army. He would eventually be challenged by his cousin Vinatilmo Corellania, who would align himself with the three Daedric queens, Azura, Meridia, and Nocturnal. They would assist him in taking down Molak Bal and Istamil, Vinatilmo managing to kill Istamil in the Temple of the Final Dark, which would put an end to the tyranny, and thus leading to the worship of the three queens within the Corellania clan. But anyway, moving on, jumping back in time to just after the Alessian Slave Rebellion. So this would occur anywhere between the year 243 in the First Era, as this is when the rebellion ended, and the year 498 in the First Era, as this is the last year of the late Aeolid era. This event most likely occurring in the middle. So what would occur at this time is that there would be a rising of tensions between the descendants of the enslaved Nades people and the surviving Aelids. Now, one of Azura's most beloved servants, Kulanwe, had desired to change this. She desired to broker peace between these two groups. However, this would be no easy task, with the constant bickering between the two groups. During this negotiation, there would be a murder, the victim being an Aelid messenger who was killed whilst running errands. Now, this would make negotiations much more difficult, as the Aelids would blame the Nades, and the Nades would not deny the murder, instead claiming that they did not care about the death of an Aelid, with the suffering that the Nades had been through at the hands of the Aelid people. As it appeared that all hell may break loose, something unexpected would happen. A member of the Nades and a member of the Aelids would work together and find who was truly the cause of the death. And it would not be either of their people. Instead, it was a servant of Molak Bal attempting to sabotage the negotiations. This would unite the Aelids and the Nades against the forces of Molak Bal, leading to peace between their people. But this did not mean the end of the work for Kulanwe, as she would set out to stop the meddling of Molak Bal. However, for this, Kulanwe would eventually be trapped and captured, being sent to Cold Harbor to be tortured for millennia for her meddling with Molak Bal's plans. But anyway, moving on. This being to around the year 700 in the First Era, as this is when the Battle for Red Mountain would occur. Now, after this battle would occur, the Tribunal Temple would take the Kagranak tools, swearing to Azura that these tools would never be used due to how dangerous these tools were. However, the Tribunal Temple would go back on their promises, making a pilgrimage to the Red Mountain to use these tools on the heart of Lorcan. After completing the ritual that would make them gods, Azura would appear, cursing them for going back on their oath, telling them that the Nerevar would return to punish them. Sothasil would mock Azura, telling her, "The old gods are cruel and arbitrary, and distant from the hopes and fears of Mer. Your age is past. We are the new gods, born of the flesh and wise and caring of the needs of our people. Spare us your threats and chiding. In constant spirit, we are bold and fresh, and will not fear you." Azura would not stand this. In that moment, the Kaima became the Dunmer, their skin becoming ashen, their eyes fire. Azura would tell the tribunal gods, "This is not my act, but your act. You have chosen your fate and the fate of your people, and all the Dunmer shall share your fate. From now to the end of time, you think yourself gods, but you are blind, and all is darkness." So this event, which would cause an entire race to change, would be due to the Tribunal Temple betraying Azura, choosing to use the dangerous tools. Now for the final event in the First Era, this being in the year 2920. After the disaster at Gil Vardel, which was caused by Molag Bal spreading a deadly red mist over the city, which would destroy it and its inhabitants, Sotha Sil would call for a meeting in Cold Harbour with 8 of the Daedric Princes. Now little is known about the terms of the Cold Harbour Compact, whether Sotha Sil threatened the Daedric Princes or made them an offer that they could not refuse. But with their agreement to this pact, these 8 Daedric Princes could not directly manifest on Nian, one of these Daedric Princes being Azura. However, there are some loopholes to this primarily being that the Daedric Princes could still manifest through statues and possession of chosen people. Now, onto the Second Era, this being in the year 582. Azura would enlist the help of the Vestige, this being through a strange encounter, as the Vestige made their way to the Way Shrine in Seydanin. The Daedric Prince would possess a bystander to speak to the Vestige. This is when the Vestige would be enlisted to help solve an issue that Vivec had been facing. Although Vivec and Azura were not on the best of terms, she still loved her people and the island of Vardenfell, and did not want to watch them suffer with what was occurring. Vivec was having issues with his powers due to an outside force. With this discovery, the Vestige would be sent on a quest to uncover what was happening, eventually encountering Serin, whose brother Chodala was claiming to be the Naravarine, the subject of one of Azura's prophecies. The Vestige would find out that Chodala had a staff, which was actually the cause of Vivec's loss of power. The staff actually being the staff of Sotha Sil, which was known as the Sunna Ra. Azura would name Serin her champion, assisting the Vestige in stopping the false Naravarine from defeating Vivec. Serin would help the Vestige in defeating Chodala. They would recover the Sunna Ra, returning the staff to Lord Vivec in an attempt to save the Tribunal God. However, things would not go as expected, this being due to a betrayer in their midst. The archcanon caring for Vivec was an imposter, actually being the servant of Clavicus Vile, Barbas. Barbas would use the staff to further drain the power of Vivec in an attempt to kill the Tribunal God. This would lead to Bardal resuming its collision course for Vivec City. The siphoning of Vivec's power had all been a ploy, however, as Clavicus Vile had been attempting to locate Clockwork City. Azura would summon Barilzar, the former apprentice of Sotha Sil, requesting that he grant them entry to Clockwork City to stop Clavicus Vile and Barbas. However, as Azura was a Daedra, and the city was hidden from the Daedric Princes, Barilzar would only take the Vestige. The Vestige would defeat Barbas and would manage to restore the power to Vivec, thus preventing Bardal from colliding with the city. Moving on to another event occurring in the year 582 in the Second Era. Azura would once again seek the assistance of the Vestige, however for a different reason. The chief oracle of Azura, Rhea Opacarius, would send a messenger to contact the Vestige. Rhea desired to talk to the Vestige about the oracles of Azura going missing. A dark figure stalking the shadows was snatching them, with 2 oracles already going missing. The Vestige would then head to Pariah Abbey and speak to the statue of Azura. Through this statue, Azura would inform the Vestige how they could assist in freeing the kidnapped oracles. The Vestige would then work towards freeing the oracles, however, as they would meet up with Rhea again, she would be taken before she could give the Vestige all of the information on where the oracles were being held. The Vestige would manage to find the oracles through a note left by Rhea, as she had already seen her fate. The Vestige would manage to save the oracles from the pocket realms in Oblivion, and would return to talk to Azura. Azura would send the Vestige to defeat Daizera, the Daedra responsible for kidnapping her oracles. But anyway, moving on back to Pariah Abbey, still in the year 582 in the Second Era. So Pariah Abbey had been attacked and had their Dream Shard stolen. The Dream Shard was important as it allowed them to create potions that protected them from the supernal dreamers. The Vestige would go on a quest to recover the Dream Shard. As it turns out, it had been stolen and brought to Attura Estate because of the request of Lady Adema. The vestige would go on to defeat the true form of Lady Adama and recover the Dream Shard. The vestige would return this shard to Azura's shrine, but this threat would be a mere distraction, with the dreams of those in Stormhaven being in danger used as essentially a tool for another Daedric prince to do their bidding. Vaermina using the dreams of others to gain control and manipulate, even managing to convince and manipulate High King Emmerich. But once again, the vestige, with the guidance of Azura, would put a stop to the meddling of the Daedric prince. But anyway, moving on. To Azura requesting that the vestige aid an old servant of hers, Kulanwe. Azura would tell the vestige that she had previously placed a seal on Lealora due to the rift between Lealora and Cold Harbor. This rift was created by Kulanwe's suffering. This was done to prevent any of Molag Bal's servants from making their way out. However, someone had managed to make their way inside of Lealora, this being Vestari. The vestige would manage to enter the Tower of Vestari. Here they would find it infested with Lower Daedra. Eventually the vestige would find Loria's cell tablets and learn how to summon Irai, a winged twilight. The vestige would follow Irai, however after encountering Vestari would learn that it was a trap set by Irai meant to imprison them. Vestari and the vestige would work together to trap Irai. With Irai no longer being a problem, Kulanwe's remains would be retrieved from Cold Harbor and her torment would end. Kulanwe's bones would be placed at Azura's shrine and Azura would thank the vestige. Now moving on to the third era. This is when an agent of the Blades would encounter Azura, this being around the year 405. In this encounter, Azura would send the agent on a quest to kill a priest that had been saying rather rude things about her. In return for completing this little errand, the agent would be gifted with Azura's star for their assistance in dealing with this little inconvenience that was the priest. Moving on to the year 427 in the third era. Now Azura would perhaps be the most heavily involved of the Daedric Princes in this year when it comes to the fate of one person, this person being the one who would become the Naravarine. First taking an interest in this character when they would be sent from the Imperial City prison to Vardenfell. Azura would help guide them into becoming the Naravarine and defeating Dagoth-Ur, but also would accept their help in other matters, this being a request to help Azura win a bet. Azura and Sheogorath had a bet surrounding a priestess of Azura. This priestess was supposed to live in silence for 100 years for Azura to win, and that 100 years was almost up. However, Sheogorath was not going to let Azura win easily. So he would send Daedra to attempt to disturb this priestess. These Daedra being led by his golden saint, Starda. However, the Naravarine would kill the Daedra and allow Azura to win her bet. For this, the Naravarine would be gifted with Azura's star. But anyway, moving on to the year 433 in the third era, as this is when the hero of Kvatch would encounter Azura. Azura would request the help of the hero of Kvatch to deal with a problem that spawned a little while ago. So several years ago, 5 of Azura's followers would go on a quest to kill a vampire and its kin. However, in this quest, Azura's followers would be turned into vampires, becoming known as the Afflicted Brethren. So they would lock themselves in the lair of the vampire that they had killed. Now Azura knew her vampiric followers were suffering, and she requested that the hero of Kvatch would help them by putting them out of their misery. Azura would reward the hero of Kvatch with her star for their bravery and assistance in ending the suffering of her followers. Now moving on to the fourth era, right before the eruption of the Red Mountain that would mark the Red Year. Priests that were faithful to Azura were given visions that would lead them to safety. These visions would take the Dunmer priests away from Vardenfell and away from Morrowind, leading them to Skyrim. As thanks for the safety that the visions Azura provided brought, they would build Azura a shrine. However, with the continued worship of Azura, it would bring more and more visions, and these visions would prove too much for some, causing many to desert the shrine and worship of her. But this would not be the last of Azura worship, as one devoted Dunmer would stay, seeing all that is to come. And eventually in the year 201 in the fourth era, they would encounter the one they had predicted from the visions of Azura, the last Dragonborn. After visiting the shrine, the last Dragonborn would begin a quest to find Azura's star, which had been corrupted by a dying teacher by the name of Melin from the College of Winterhold, attempting to save himself. However, in the process of his experiments, he would kill a student. Now, the star, after being corrupted, was being used by necromancers. The last Dragonborn would be given the opportunity by Azura to fix the star through entering it and banishing the soul of Melin. It is unknown if the last Dragonborn would fix the star. So what does the history tell us about why anyone would choose to worship Azura? If we look at the various events that Azura has been involved in, like that of the Afflicted Brethren in the year 433 in the Third Era, and Kulanwe, who was captured in the early First Era, Azura cares deeply about those who worship her, looking for ways to end their suffering, finding ways to help those who worship her. We also see this with her assistance of Vivek in the Second Era. Although Azura does not particularly like Vivek, as he did break a promise to not use the Kagrenak tools in the First Era, she chose to step in and assist him in a time of need. This being due to the Dunmer who she cared about being put at risk, with Vivek losing his power. We see this again with Azura warning the priests in the early Fourth Era about the Red Year. However, with this, she did become somewhat overbearing, warning the followers about everything with the powers of vision and prophecy. So Azura is worshipped due to the protection she offers her followers, trying to protect them to the point of it scaring those receiving her visions. But this is only one piece of the puzzle. To get the full picture, we need to learn more about Azura. For this, we should move on to who worships Azura. For the worship of Azura, we should first touch on her mythology. For this, we should start with the Khajiit myths surrounding Azura, including her origin story in their beliefs. Now, the origin story for Azura in Khajiit myths is the same for all other Aedra and Daedra. This being that they come from the story of the god cats. Now, this story starts out with Fatamai and Anua, who had been around for some time before they would decide to marry and have children to share their happiness with. They would have their first litter giving birth to most of the Aedra, and then eventually their second litter giving birth to most of the Daedra. After these two litters, Anua did not want any more children. However, Fatamai would be convinced by one of her children from the first litter, Kanathi, to have more children. So Fatamai would get pregnant again. She would give birth to the moons, then Nirni and Azura, who would begin fighting for their mother's favor from the moment they were born. Anua would catch Fatamai whilst she was giving birth. Angry at her, Anua would strike Fatamai and she would flee to the Great Darkness. Fatamai's children would come and join her, protecting her from Anua's anger. Here in the Great Darkness, the last of Fatamai's children would be born, this being Lokaj. Lokaj would be born with great darkness in his heart. This great darkness knowing its name in this moment as Namira. After this, her children would leave, all but Azura, who would stay and be told 3 secrets along with many more things, staying with Fatamai as she died. Now, there is also another rumor surrounding Azura. This rumor specifically being about a statue in the city of Anvil. This statue is said to be older than the city of Anvil, with no one knowing its true origins. This statue being the Mermaid of Anvil. There is a rumor surrounding this statue that it may actually be a depiction of Azura at a time where she was worshipped by a sea-dwelling civilization. But due to the society with this mermaid being long gone, little is known about the origins of the mermaid. So now that we know a little bit about the mythology surrounding her, we should discuss who actually worships Azura. There are 2 main races that have a history of worshipping Azura, these being the Khajiit and the Dunmer. However, there have been some small groups throughout time that have also worshipped this Daedric prince, like the Coralania clan. So we should start with the Dunmer. So the Dunmer were not always the Dunmer, nor were they always worshippers of the Tribunal Temple. Instead, they were actually Ultima originally. This being until the Velothi beliefs would come around with the prophet Veloth. Because of this, Azura would be credited with teaching the Kaima the secrets of how to be different from the Ultima. Along with this, due to the betrayal of the Tribunal Temple, Azura would once again change the Kaima, this time into the color of ash, making them the Dunmer. This would also signal the change in the worship of Azura, so Azura for the Dunmer would be, for the majority of time, just be seen as the good Daedra, an anticipation of Sothasil rather than a full-on god herself, being seen as an early ancestral version of Sothosil to the followers of the Tribunal Temple. But not all Dunmer were followers of the Tribunal Temple. We see this with the Ashlanders who continued to worship Azura and the other good Daedra, viewing the Tribunal Temple instead as false gods, with the Dunmer that were loyal worshippers of Azura being warned of the looming disaster that was the Red Year, leading to them escaping. However, with the Red Year occurring in the 4th era in the 5th year, we would see a resurgence of Azura worship amongst the Dunmer, this being with the restructuring of the Tribunal Temple by those formerly known as the dissident priests. This restructuring would lead to the Tribunal Temple becoming the New Temple. This New Temple focusing on the reclamations, these being the good Daedra who reclaimed their positions as the gods of the Dunmer. Now, with this worship in all of the phases of the Kaima and the Dunmer, Azura and the other good Daedra have been viewed as the ancestors of the Dunmer as a group. The Dunmer are not the only worshippers of Azura originating from the Altmer. We also see the Corellania clan who remained in Somerset when the followers of Veloth left. The leader of the Corellanians at the time of Veloth the Prophet, Kinlady Valara Mil Corella, was converted to Daedra worship, thus converting her entire clan. Now, during their time, they have worshipped the various Daedric Princes. However, with the hostile takeover of the clan that was Istamil Corellania, who was backed by Malagbal, this would change. After Istamil was challenged by Vinotilmo, who was backed by the Three Queens, the Corellanians would converge onto the worship of the Three Queens. One of these Three Queens being the Queen of Dusk, this being Azura. To the Corellanians, Azura is seen as the queen who guides them through the various changes throughout life. She is the goddess of beauty, love, and fortune. Along with this, Azura is viewed as a sort of negotiator between the Corellanians and her more sterner sisters. The Corellanians, unlike the Dunmer, were worshippers of Azura throughout time, not following the Tribunal Temple, instead continuing with their worship of the Three Queens. But anyway, moving on to the Khajiit. The Khajiit view of Azura is slightly different, although still positive. She is seen as the favorite daughter of Fatamai and the mother of all Khajiit. The reason for the mother title is that she is credited with creating the Khajiit race out of the forest people. Now, with this, there are two different claims who the originating race were, with some believing that the forest people being the Bosmer, as they are the wood elves from the forest, and others believing that they were the Altmer, as the Altmer are the origins for the other Mer races, like the Kaima. In Khajiit belief, Azura has three forms: her human form, her Khajiit form, and her Mer form, these being known as her phases. With the beliefs of the Khajiit, Azura knows the names of every Khajiit that will ever live. She is a twilight path to love and redemption. Along with this, Azura oversees the gates of the crossing behind the lunar lattice. This is the sort of twilight realm between death and the afterlife, this being a sort of version of limbo. This goes with the idea that Azura to the Khajiit is the keeper of all gates and keys, all rims and thresholds. This along with her normal association with magic, beauty and prophecy. So with this sort of judgment idea, we also see her association with another of the god cats, this being Kanathi. Kanathi is viewed as Azura's messenger, who is said to ferry the souls of the dead for Azura to judge. There is also another sort of association that Azura holds with death, more specifically the death of Varmina in Khajiit belief. In Khajiit belief, Varmina was an underworld spirit being born from the fear Fatamai felt. She feared losing her children. Azura killed Varmina, and now Varmina haunts their dreams. However, she is seen as unable to actually harm the Khajiits in these dreams. Now, with the Khajiit, the worship of Azura has decreased, this being due to the rise of Riddle Sar. With this, she is now seen as the distant mother of the Khajiit. So based on the worshippers of Azura, why would anyone choose to worship Azura? Well, in the stories of the Dunmer, the Corellanians, and the Khajiit, Azura has been a sort of guide and protector for those who worship her, both in life and in death, in good times and in times of hardship or danger. We see this with the Corellanians relying on Azura when they challenged Istamil and Malagbal, with Azura being viewed as a guide by them. We also see the guide idea coming through in the Khajiit beliefs, with the Khajiit associating her with the path to love and redemption. Along with the guiding hand that Azura is seen as, Azura in the Dunmer and the Khajiit beliefs is viewed as a mother for the Khajiit and an ancestor for all of the Dunmer. So these groups worship her either due to the familiarity they feel due to the motherly sort of presence in their mythology, or the guiding hand she provides throughout life and into the afterlife. However, this is only one part of the story, not the full picture. For that, we will also have to discuss the creations of Azura. So when it comes to the creations of Azura, there are three main types of creations: her realm in oblivion, her creatures, and her artifacts. But along with this, there is a strange, supposed creation of hers that we should also touch on. This supposed creation, according to the stories of the Khajiit, is moon sugar. Yes, even in the children's stories, there is a claim that Azura would gift the moon sugar to the Khajiit. In the myths of the Khajiit, it is said that in the three secrets of Azura, when she would speak the third secret, the moons shone down on the marshes and their light would become sugar. So what even is this magical substance? Well, it is a sort of crystal substance that seems to glow from within when the light hits it. It happens to have slight magical properties along with strong narcotic effects. It is often used in the cuisine of the Khajiit due to their sweet tooth, along with being used to make a stronger substance known as skooma. This is not the only creation of Azura, of course. There are many others, like her realm in oblivion, this being Moon Shadow. Now, Moon Shadow is said to be so beautiful that it is almost blinding. However, Azura is still rather welcoming to the mortals who dare to venture into her realm. Moonshadow is described as being a giant garden, filled with flowers and majestic trees, waterfalls flowing throughout, this realm containing a beautiful city made of silver. With the blinding beauty of this place, to the eyes of mortals of course, the colours run like water, along with the heavily perfumed smell that carries throughout the air. Inside of this realm, there is also the Rose Palace, which is the dwelling of Azura. But anyway, moving on to the creatures that serve Azura, this being the winged twilights. So the winged twilights are an intelligent, winged species of Daedra. They somewhat resemble harpies, however, their wings are more bat-like, along with the scales that they have on their bodies. Winged twilights are more often found working as messengers for Azura. This lower Daedra is the main Daedra associated with Azura, but not the end of her creations, as Azura would also have several artifacts associated with her. One of these artifacts being Azura's star, or the Twilight Star, as it is also known. This artifact was created by Azura. This star is also used as a sort of symbol of Azura. This star is an 8-pronged soul gem that is infinitely refillable. Along with this, there is also the Dream Shard, which is another of the artifacts associated with Azura. This artifact is said to be a shard of Azura's realm, Moon Shadow. It is important to the followers of Azura that are part of the Spirit Wardens, as the followers part of this group use the Dream Shard to create a potion known as the Dreamless Potion. This potion protects the users from Vayamina's madness by keeping them awake. But there are also other important artifacts, like that of the Ring of the Moon and Star. This ring was important in the Neravarine prophecy, as it was originally the Ring of the Nerevar. It is said that it was forged by the Dwemer by a smith of the sorcerer priest Kagranak for Indoril Nerevar. This ring was then blessed by Azura. This ring gave the wearer the power of persuasion, along with an indisputable proof of their identity, as if this ring was worn by anyone who was not the Nerevar or their reincarnation, they would die instantly due to Azura's blessing. Now there is another artifact associated with Azura, this being the Moonlight Blade. It is said that the Moonlight Blade was plucked off the staff of Azura and given to the Khajiit to use as a weapon. This artifact is associated with the order that was known as the Order of the Hidden Moon. This ancient order is no longer seen in Khajiit society, but their purpose was to guide the souls of Khajiit, both those who are pure and those who had been tainted by Namira, the special blade being used in helping to usher souls in the afterlife. With this order, there would be one guardian chosen to wield the blade. However, after a feud within the order, this blade would remain untouched for centuries, no longer being used to help guide the souls of the departed. So what do the creations of Azura tell us about why anyone would choose to worship Azura? If we look at the artifacts of Azura, like the Dream Shard, it has been used as a form of protection against another Daedric Prince, preventing those who use the potions it creates from becoming the victims of her control and nightmares. nightmares. So there is this protective aspect of Azura. We also see this with the guiding and protective aspect with the Moonlight Blade. That was a weapon capable of killing Dro M'Athra and guiding souls to the afterlife. So the creations of Azura provide guidance and protection to those who use them. So based on who Azura is, her history, who worships her, and her various creations, we can finally answer the question, why would anyone choose to worship Azura? So for the Khajiit and the Dunmer, Azura is viewed as the origins of these races. The Dunmer seeing her as more of the origin of the race, being called the mother soul of the Dunmer people, and the Khajiit calling her the mother of all Khajiit, having the same sort of feeling towards her, viewing her as their reason for existing as a race. Along with this, she is painted as a more caring Daedric Prince when it comes to her followers. We see this with the comments of Sigilla Parate. Molokbal wanted my mind, Boethia wanted my arms, and Nocturnal perhaps my curiosity. Azura wants all of that, and our love above all. Not our abject slavering, but our honest and genuine caring in all its forms. It is important to her that our emotions be engaged in her worship, and our love must also be directed inward. If we love her and hate ourselves, she feels our pain. I will, for all time, have no other mistress. Which is why Azura has such a devoted group of followers. They feel as if their great lady is concerned about them, their troubles and their pains. We also see this with the afflicted brethren in the Third Era in the year 433. Azura was greatly pained by the suffering of her worshippers who had been transformed into vampires, who had been suffering boarded up inside of that lair all of those years, so they would not be able to infect or attack anyone. So Azura would send someone to end their suffering. Along with this, she is very protective of those she views as her subjects, like the Dunmer of Vardenfell in the Second Era in the year 582. In this year, Vivek would lose power and Azura would help to protect the Dunmer by providing assistance to the Vestige in helping to restore his power. Along with this, in the Fourth Era, when Bardau would finally fall, she would protect those who were her followers by warning them of the fate that was to come. With this, and providing the Spirit Wardens with the Dream Shard to make potions to prevent Vaermina from having access to those who use them, Azura would be a sort of caring and protective Daedra that guided those who followed her throughout life and into the afterlife. So you may want to worship Azura as a spirit warden, protecting others from the nightmares that Vaermina may inflict, or as someone seeking guidance through the various difficult challenges that life holds. So let me know in the comments if you would worship Azura. A special thank you to all of our Lore Archaeologist supporters. You guys helped keep the channel running. And thank you to anyone who is joining our memberships. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed this video, you should check out this one. It is about the tribunal god Vivek and why anyone would choose to worship him.